Hey everybody, in this demonstration I'm going to show some compositing and effects techniques. If you're taking one of my classes, one of the assignments that you have to do is what we call a VFX shot, or a compositing exercise, where basically you got to take some video with your iPhone and do something fun with it, utilizing one of the compositing techniques that we cover, which can be motion tracking, camera tracking, rotoscoping, keying, using mats, blending modes, that kind of stuff. So in this demonstration, I want to do a compositing demo to give you some ideas of the type of thing I'm talking about. So what I have here is a video clip that was taken with my iPhone, and you can see that I'm gesturing and making like I'm interacting with something. And so for this project, I want you to create something where you're adding graphics or effects to video. You're going to shoot some video with your iPhone or whatever camera phone you have handy, and add stuff to it in some type of interactive way. So here's the demo that I'm going to rebuild. So I've added some graphics in front of me. I'm mimicking like I'm pushing buttons, and then I've added sort of a very simple little rotoscoped effect there onto my eyes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I've got my source clip that I pulled from my iPhone. I'm going to jump into After Effects, and I'm going to import that clip. Now I also have two After Effects projects here of the graphics that I'm going to use. I've got this screen graphic. In fact, let me go ahead and just open that up here. You can see what that is. This is just a simple graphic that I created in After Effects using a text layer and a couple shape layers. And then I've also got another graphic here of this target scope from an earlier lesson. So I'm going to use each of these again, but of course for something like this you could use graphics that you created in Photoshop or Illustrator, pretty much any source that you want. Okay, so again, I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to bring in my source clip, and I'm also going to bring in my screen that I've created. So I'm going to import the one project into a new project. That brings in that entire project. Now I'll take the movie clip and add it to a composition. And right off the bat here, I'm going to trim this clip because it's a little bit longer than I need. So I think I'm going to set an in point by putting the beginning of the work area here at about 5 seconds approximately, and then I'll take it right up to the end. That's fine. So remember, this slider here is your work area slider, and when you set the work area, if you then want to trim the composition to that length, you can right click on the work area and choose Trim Comp to Work Area, or you can choose it from the composition menu as well. The only thing, when you do that, it doesn't zero out the start time. See, the start time now says 5 seconds. So if I want to zero out the start time, I could go to the composition settings, and where it says start time code, I would zero out that number. There we go. Okay, so I've trimmed the clip. Now in this case, I've got my screen graphic ready to go. I'm going to drop that in there on top. And basically, I'm going to position it in 3D space so that it looks like it's between my hands. So I'm going to put my time marker here kind of a few seconds in where my hands are apart. And then with the screen layer, I'm going to click the 3D switch, and I'm going to use the 3D controls on the layer to tilt and rotate the layer and move the layer over. And then I also want to scale it down, so I'll hit S for scale. I'm scaling it down, and basically want to position it here so it looks like it's kind of between my hands. And I don't want to have to rotoscope or cut my hand out to put in front of it, so I'm going to kind of position it to the side a little bit. Okay, that position looks pretty good. Now, I'm obviously going to animate this layer, so I'm going to have it expand as my hands come apart. So I'll animate the scale there. I'll set a keyframe for scale here where my hands are apart. And then I'll go backwards from there to right about here where my hands start to open, and I'll put the just the width to 0, so it's going to expand as my hands come apart. Maybe I'll put an ease in on that second keyframe there, so it comes to a nice smooth stop as the hands come apart. And then I mimic like I'm pushing some buttons, and then put the hands back together and gonna have it collapse. So in this case, I'm just going to grab these two keyframes and I'm going to copy and paste, doing an edit copy, edit paste, and then I want to flip those keyframes around. So I'll do animation, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframes. That flips the keyframes around. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now, if you look at this clip though, if I hit play here, and you know what, let me go ahead and disable the audio for that layer. I don't need the audio. And if I hit play and take a look at this, you can see that one of the issues here is it's a handheld shot. There's a little bit of wobble to the shot. I could stabilize the clip using the warp stabilizer effect. But in this case, I want to keep the handheld look. And so instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to motion track the movement, which should be pretty easy in this case because there's all these sort of spots on the background that'll be easy to track. And then I can apply that movement to my layer so that my layer has that same kind of handheld movement. So I'll select my movie layer. I'll go to Animation, Track Motion. That opens up the layer in the layer controls, layer window, I should say, and it gives me a track point. And I'll go ahead and expand these search area and feature area squares a little bit. And I'm going to position the track point over one of these spots on the wall, which should be pretty easy to follow. It's not moving very much, so the search area doesn't need to be that big. And in the tracker controls, I can go ahead and analyze the footage. Starting at time 0, I'll go ahead and analyze forward and let the tracker follow that movement. And then I will apply that movement to a null object layer. Now you might be wondering, why not apply it directly to the screen layer? And the reason for that is if I apply the movement directly to the screen layer, it's going to move the screen over to this location because that's where the attach point is. So instead of applying the movement directly to the screen layer, I'll choose Layer, New, Null Object. And then in the tracker controls, where it says Edit Target, I will target that null object layer. Hit apply, hit OK. And so now what I've got here is a null object layer with that movement. You'll see that if I scrub through here, that null object layer, this little square here, moves with the dot on the wall. Now going back here to the beginning, if I take the screen layer and then parent it with the layer parent, switch there and go directly to the null object like so. That will get the screen to follow the movement of the null object without moving it to that location. So now you can see that as the shot kind of bumps around, the graphic that I've added moves with it. So that works very nicely. Now the next thing I think I want to do here is, as I'm mimicking, like I'm pushing these buttons, I'm going to go into the pre-comp and animate the button colors. So making sure that the time is synchronized between my two compositions, which that's a preference setting. If you go to your After Effects menu, settings, and then I think it's under the, they've changed things a little bit here in this version, but I think under project settings, And what we're looking for is the setting that says synchronize time of all related items, actually under composition. There it is, synchronize time of all related items. As long as that is checked, our nested composition, the time in the nested composition will match, the time in the main composition. So we can switch back and forth and synchronize our animation. So that said, I'll put my time marker where I want to animate the first button. So like right here, looks like I'm maybe hitting that top middle button. So I'll go into the pre-comp, figure out which layer here has that top button. Looks like it's this one. I'll go into that shape layer, going into the contents, and figure out which shape group has the button in it that I need. Just by clicking through the shape groups here. There we go. Looks like it's this one here. And I'm going to animate the color value. So I'll click the stopwatch for color. I'll go 1 frame forward by hitting page down and change the color to another color, maybe red. And then I'm going to go 5 frames forward. So hitting page down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'll return the color value back to white. So when my finger hits that button, it's going to flash red and then fade back to white. Now to make it easier to do the other buttons, I will copy and paste these keyframes so I don't have to do all that again. I'll just select those keyframes, do an edit, copy, and then I need to figure out which button I need to do next. So going back to the main comp, and of course that animation flows upstream here into that main composition. So there we go. I hit the middle one. Then it looks like I maybe hit the one right next to it at that time. So again, I'll go into that pre-comp, go to that next button, and hit Command V to paste. So it pastes those same keyframes. Whoops, and you know what? I think I need to open that up and select the color value and then paste. There we go. So it pastes it to the right property. There we go. So repeating this process, I'm going to go through the timeline here and finish animating the buttons. So I'll pause the recording while I do that. Okay, so I just finished animating the buttons, so it looks like I'm pushing the buttons and they're turning red. And then finally here, I hit the bottom button where I've got the word activated, so I got to go into that pre-comp again and figure out which layer and which shape group has that element. So it looks like the same shape layer in this case, and it looks like it's this shape group right here. So again, if I just want to use the same keyframes, I can click on the color property and hit paste so that it's gonna flash red. And I think in this case what I want to do is when it flashes red, I'm going to trim an in point for the text layer by selecting it and hitting Option and the left bracket key so that when it flashes red, when the button flashes red and fades out, the word appears. There we go. That looks pretty cool. Now I'm going to select the layer and hit the U key to reveal the keyframes. That way we can see the animation. And I think what I want to do is just nudge it all a little bit forward, like 1 or 2 frames forward. So I'm going to select all these keyframes, and then on the keyboard I'm going to hit Option and the left arrow key to nudge the keyframes 1 frame ahead. And I'm doing that just so that the animation kind of precedes the movement a little bit better, kind of hooks up to the movement a little better. Yeah, there we go. That looks pretty nice. Let me hit play on that. Boom, there we go. That looks good. Okay, now the only thing I think that I want to change here is I've got the word activated kind of facing the wrong way around. I don't want to, I could spin the whole graphic around 180 degrees, but then my animation wouldn't hook up with the fingers. So in fact, what I'll do is to flip the word around so it looks like it's facing me instead of facing us. I'll go into the pre-comp, grab the text layer, hit S for scale, and if I unlink the width and height and put in -100, that will flip the layer horizontally and back out here. That'll make it look like it's facing me. Okay, so that works good. I'll go ahead and preview and see how it looks. All right, looking pretty good there. So I've got the animation in the pre-comp synchronized with my movement, and I've got the graphic motion track attached to a track null to follow the movement, the handheld movement in the shot. Now to finish this up, it's really just going to be a matter of adding some effects and trying to kind of make this look a little bit more seamless. And one of the things I talk about when we do the compositing lessons in my class is how compositing is really problem solving. It's figuring out how to put a shot together in a way that is, cohesive, so that the shot looks like it belongs, so that the stuff that we're adding looks like it belongs in the shot, so that things match in terms of quality, resolution, color values, focus, graininess, things like that. So in this case here, I think it'll help if I blur the screen a little bit. So under Effect, Blur and Sharpen, I'm going to add a Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur the screen maybe around 12 pixels or so that it isn't quite so sharp. Okay, let me toggle the effect on and off. You can see the before and after. There we go. And in this case, I think it would look cool if I add like a glow effect to the screen. If I grab the screen layer, do Effect, Stylize, Glow. And I don't want to do a color value glow. That's kind of overexposing it. I want to do an outer glow. So in the glow effect, where it says based on, we change it to alpha channels. So it's adding the glow around the perimeter of the layer. So you can see there the glow value being added around the perimeter of the button. And in this case, I'm going to change the glow colors. I'm going to pick maybe a yellow color for each of the A and B colors. And then I'm going to increase my glow radius. There we go. And I'm going to change my glow operation as well. I think I'm going to go with maybe screen. Back off the radius a little bit there. Maybe bring up the intensity a little bit. And I'm going to change this color looping option. Instead of ABA, I'm going to go to B to A, I think, maybe. And maybe change one of the colors. Actually, let's try A to B. Maybe I'll try a different blending mode. And you can experiment with these settings, obviously, until you get something that you like. All right, that looks pretty cool for now. And then another thing I think I can do here that will help it blend with our background more is to use a layer blending mode. So instead of just normal, which is just doing a composite on top, I'll change it into a blending mode, maybe like add, so that it's going to blend with the underlying footage. And a tip for cycling through these blending modes is if you hit Shift and Shift and the plus key not on the number pad, but on your alphanumeric keyboard. If you do Shift and then plus or minus, you can cycle through your blending mode menu until you find a blending mode that you think looks good. So in this case, I think I like that add blending mode. And I might bring my layer opacity down a little bit, make it a bit more translucent, and see how that looks. So that's starting to look like it's, a lot more a part of the shot. Now I might dial in these glow settings a little bit better and see if I can get something that I like more. I'm going to pause my recording while I do that. Okay, so I've dialed in the glow settings a little bit more to my liking. Here's what it looks like. And I'm going to add one more treatment to the screen that I've added here just for fun. And I want to give it kind of a glitchy kind of a look. And in your effects and presets, you can see I've already got it pulled up here. There is an animation preset called Bad TV, which is kind of a fun one to use if you want to add like a glitch kind of an effect. So I'm going to grab this one called Bad TV 3, and I'm going to drag it onto my layer. Actually, I'll bring my layer back, time back to 0, and then I will drag it onto my layer, onto my screen layer. And when I drag the time marker through here, you can see what that's doing. If I hit play, this Bad TV animation preset is adding a combination of effects to the layer to give it this kind of video glitch kind of a treatment. But the thing is when I hit play, the glitch treatment is a little too slow and maybe a little too extreme for what I want in this case. So over here in the effect control, you can see the effects that the preset has added. It added wave warp, and notice that one of the numbers here is red. That means that value is being controlled by a script, by an expression script. So that's probably the thing that's animating the effect here. The other effects don't look like they have any expressions or any keyframes going on. So it's probably just this wave height value that is creating the kind of glitch. So what I'm going to do is come down here to my layer in the timeline, and to show expressions, I'm going to hit the letter E twice, EE. That will solo out that property that has the expression. And sure enough, you can see there is a script, an expression script on that property, which is controlling what it's doing. And if I take a look at that, you can see there's a time value. Time divided by 1.5. I'm guessing here that if I make this number smaller, so it's being divided into a smaller increment, it'll be faster. Less time between glitches. So I'm going to change that from 1.5 to maybe like 0.2 and see how that looks. So sometimes with these, with expressions, you just got to look at the numbers and see if you can figure out what number to change to kind of get the results that you want. And you can see that in this case, that did the trick. Now it's glitching faster than it was before. Now I want the amount, the distance that it's glitching to be less. So I'm guessing that these numbers, times 50 plus 25, are affecting that. So I'm going to change this. Instead of maybe 50, I'm going to make it maybe 30. And instead of plus 25, I'm going to go maybe plus 10. And yep, sure enough, you can see that made the amount that it's glitching less. So a lot of times you can kind of figure out just by looking at the script. All right, that looks pretty cool in this case. I'm going to take a look at my effects here, and I think I want my blur effect to come after everything else. So I changed the stacking order, and keep in mind that the order that your effects are stacked up in does affect how it looks. It affects the order that they're calculated and composited in. Okay, so that's another thing to experiment with when you're doing a composited shot like this. So in fact, maybe I want that to come after the glow, but before the other stuff. All right. Now I could continue to, add effects and play around with the treatment here, but I think that's certainly good enough for this demonstration here. And taking a look at this here, let me zoom back out. I think I just want to fine-tune the placement a little bit. I think I need to maybe move the screen down a little bit, like that. There we go. And I'll hit play, see how it looks. Great. Now maybe I want want it to collapse a little bit sooner, so it's not like on top of the hand so much. So I'll grab these keyframes and slide them over. So there we go. Yeah, a little bit quicker. And maybe I'll tilt it this way just a little bit more. Great. All right, now for the last part of this in my demo, when I dropped my hands down, I added like a light effect on my eyes. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my movie layer and I'm going to do another motion tracker. I'm going to put my time marker right about, or in fact, I'm going to track it in reverse because it's going to be easier to do it that way. So on the last frame here, and let me set my work area by hitting the letter N there. There we go. And I'm going to select the layer, go Animation, Track Motion. So it adds another motion tracker. This time I'm going to put it over my eye. And I can make the search area a little bit bigger, make the feature area a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to analyze in reverse. So I'll bring out the tracker panel, analyze backwards until probably about 9.5 seconds. I only need the last couple seconds. So that looks pretty good. If I scrub through there, you can see it followed my eye pretty good. So I'm going to make a null object, layer, new, null object. And I'm going to target that null object, just like before. Hitting apply, hitting OK. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the other eye. Again, selecting the movie layer, going animation, track motion, setting up another tracker, this time over the other eye, making the search area and feature area maybe a little bit bigger. And then analyzing backwards, again for about 2 seconds. All right, that looks pretty good. I think the initial result is certainly usable. So again, I'll make a null object, and I'll target that null object, hit apply, hit OK. Okay, so now I've got 2 null objects for each eye. I got 1 for each eye, I should say, with the movement from about 10 seconds on. So after I close the screen and start to drop my hands and lift my head up, that's where I want my eyes to start to glow. So now I'm going to create the effect. I'm going to create a solid layer, layer, new, solid. I'm going to call it lens flare, making it the comp size and hitting OK, making a solid black layer. Now I'm going to add a lens flare effect. I'm going to go Effect, Generate, Lens Flare. Now here's the trick. I want the lens flare to follow the movement that I just tracked for my eye. So down here in the timeline, I'm going to go to null number 2 and hit P for position to show those keyframes. And then I'm going to open up the lens flare and open up the effect, open up the effect settings. And here's the trick. I need to go to the flare center property and use the parent and link button to link the flare center to the position, so dragging directly to the word position for that null object. That way, for the last couple seconds of the timeline, that lens flare is going to follow that movement. Now, of course, I don't see the footage underneath because I've got these lens flares applied to a black solid. So I'm going to add an effect to that layer. They've actually added a new effect in After Effects for any time you've got something on a solid black layer and you want to perfectly key out the black background. If you go to Effect and then you go to Keying and apply Unmult. Very useful here for if you have an effect on a black solid, like in this case, or if you have stock footage with a black background, like a lot of times fire footage comes with a black background. Now I'm going to go to the flare effect and drop the flare brightness down. That's actually going to be the property that I animate. And you can see that that flare follows my eye. Now for the other eye, I'm basically just going to duplicate the lens flare effect. Select it here in the effect controls, hit Command D, and then down here in the timeline, going to show the position property for the null number 3. go to the second lens flare and just relink the flare center to the other null object's position. There we go. Let me collapse all these layers down, load a preview, and see how this looks. Now, of course, I don't want those showing at this point, so you know what I'm forgetting? I need to animate that flare brightness. So at about, I think at about 10, 20 or so here, as my hands start to drop, I'm going to animate the flare brightness. So I'm going to keyframe that, I'm going to put it at 0, and then as my head comes up here, I'm going to bring that flare brightness back up to, what did I have it at, about 40 or 30, something like that. There we go. Now I'll turn off the visibility of these null objects so I don't see those layer boxes in the way. There we go. And then, of course, at the end here, I need, I seem to have an extra little bit of time at the end here. I'm going to trim the comp to this last frame of the video here. Trim comp to work area. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. Load a preview. And that is looking pretty good. Now, I think as a very last thing that I'm going to do here, I want to speed this all up, and I think I also want to blend these lens flares a little better. I'm going to put the layer in a blending mode, so maybe add or one of the others. Ooh, add's a little intense. I'll cycle through my menu there, and I think I like the one I used in my example was maybe soft light or hard light. I might use the layer opacity to drop it down a little bit, or not. And I think in my example one, I also added another effect to give it an even more kind of a unique look. I think hard light is the one I went with. And then I'm going to add another effect here under Effect. I'm going to go to Distort, and I think the one I used was under Blur. Actually, yeah, Blur, and then I think I did CC Cross Blur, and then cranked up the radius X. See, so it's creating like a horizontal blur, and I think I might change it to like add here instead of blend. Yeah, see, you can see that creates kind of a neat effect. And turn that off. Kind of like that. Ooh, that's neat. And I think I want that to be even more dramatic, so I'm going to duplicate that effect by hitting Command D. Ooh, look at that. Yes. And then this one, maybe I bring it down a little bit. Maybe I put that one in a different blending mode. Each of these has its own blending mode. I think I like the multiply one. And obviously you just got to experiment. All right, that looks pretty cool. So work with my graphic, and then my eyes flare up. Now to finally finish this up here, speed up the whole thing, I'm going to pre-compose everything. I'm going to nest everything and then time stretch it or time remap it to speed it up. So first of all, I'm going to rename this composition. I'm going to call this one Comp. And then I'm going to go back to my project panel and take the composition and nest it in a new composition. So I'm basically grouping everything together in a new comp, which I'm going to rename. I'm going to call this one Retimed. And in the retimed one, I'm going to use the time stretch value to speed it up. So I'm going to speed it up to about 6 seconds instead of 12 seconds. So it's going to be about twice the speed. And that affects, of course, everything inside that composition. Now I want it to freeze frame on the last frame here instead of just cutting to black. So how do we do that? Well, if we select that layer, go to Layer, Time, Enable Time Remapping, we can then extend the out point of the layer as needed. And the thing is, though, it's still going to cut to black there because that last keyframe that it gives us for time remapping is the time code for the frame after the last frame of picture. So what I need to do is page up, hit the page up key to go one frame ahead of that, and add a time remap keyframe by clicking the Add Keyframe button, and then deleting the one that it had given me. So now it's going to stay frozen on that last frame of picture, and we'll see how that looks. Pretty cool. And then finally here, when I freeze frame it in my example, I added my target scope that I brought in from the previous lessons. So just to give it a interesting treatment, I brought in this target scope layer, and I'll slide it over by dragging it over or hitting the left bracket key so it doesn't appear until that time. I'm going to scale it up, and I'm also going to change the position to kind of center it over my face like that. That's pretty cool. And then I also gave it an overall kind of colorized treatment by creating an adjustment layer and then adding a color correction effect like Colorama. And in the Colorama effect here, I'm going to go to the output cycle. Colorama basically maps a new color palette onto the layer, or in this case, the layers underneath because it's on an adjustment layer. So the input phase controls what aspect of the layer it's mapping the new color values onto, and the output cycle is the color palette that it's mapping on. So there's a whole bunch of nice preset palettes here. I'm going to grab the one that says Solarize Red. Give it a cool, like, solarized red kind of a look there. Now, I don't want that to appear until the freeze frame, so I'll slide the endpoint over. And there we go. I'll hit play and see how it looks. Pretty cool. Now you can see I've got some animation inside that target scope comp, which maybe I don't want that animation to flow upstream. So here's one last tip. If I want to freeze frame it just right from the get-go, I can select that layer, choose Layer, Time, Freeze Frame, and that will add the time remap property with just one hold keyframe to the layer. So it freezes for the entire duration of the layer on that frame. There we go. Easy as that. All right. One last play and see how it looks.